Podcasting can feel like shouting into the void sometimes. You're putting out content week after week, but it feels like nobody's listening. And I've been there. But here's what I've learned. Growth isn't about working harder. It's more about focusing on finding the right levers that you can pull on. And the beauty is that this is different for everyone because we all have different starting points. So in this video, I'm going to share the 5 levers that are going to change the trajectory of your podcast this year, even if it feels like a mess right now. There are, of course, dozens of variables that you can turn into levers, but in the early days of a podcast, I feel like these 5 are the most impactful to start with. The great news is you don't need to master all 5 levers right away in order to grow. So the first lever is associations. There's a reason that guests are growth accelerators for a podcast. That's because of the associations that can form from them. And it's exactly what allowed my very first podcast in 2016 to take off, even though I had no big audience or real credibility. But if you're not careful, this can backfire big time, which is why you don't just want to chase guests that have really big follower counts. And I get it, it's tempting when you're trying to grow. So the shift is focusing more on the content associations than the guest. Pick people that will bring the type of topics and talking points that would enhance the positioning of your show. This is more reliable to get your dream guests anyway. Every big guest knows that they are bringing value to your show by being there. So by focusing on what you actually want to talk to them about is your best chance at getting their attention. The third type of association are status symbols. I had a consulting client that came to me from a major global TV network. And I was like, we have to leverage this to the extent that you're able to. It's kind of like if you did all the work to go to a Harvard or Stanford, you want to let people know about it. This one is really worth highlighting so you can see it at play with your favorite podcasters. Lever number 2 is production quality. People do judge your podcast and really anything in the first 10 seconds. But here's the good news. Small upgrades can really make a big impact. In the years to come, you're going to see a huge rise in the professional studios that are built out using tens of thousands of dollars, which does make filming podcasts in person more accessible, especially if you're traveling to major cities and you don't want to worry about bringing all of your equipment with you. You can see how filming in a pixel perfect studio can give off all the right signals. Even if you're a small show, you're signaling that you take this seriously enough to be in this big studio and pay for that studio time, because people do value things based on how much money they think is put into it. It's the very same reason when we see a huge trailer for Netflix movie or a show that's coming out, we assume that it's gotta be good because it's on Netflix. Like, why would Netflix put this much money into it if it wasn't good? You do get the benefit of having that initial assumption and a series of other assumptions that typically follow along with that. But I want to warn you that this can wear off. It's amazing for discovering new people. The visuals are going to be so compelling, most likely, that it is going to help people stop for a few seconds if they're scrolling by a clip. Yet you still have to deliver. If the content is crappy, then the 8K cameras and the skyline view can feel kind of dumb. So that's why I recommend building out a home studio of some sort to start. Because even if people judge your podcast, you don't want to fake being something that you're not. Just like you wouldn't rent a Lambo if you love and drive your Toyota. It's preferable to lean into the Toyota if that's really you, because that in and of itself is a brand. And there's a ton of people whose brand is not that high-end studio quality style. There's actually a famous YouTuber who's known for filming in his cars that are usually under $3,000 total. So they're used cars, they're kind of beat up, and he has a couple of them. And his audience has said that, hey, if you go into some type of office or you upgrade the studio or whatever, like, we're gone, okay? We like you in the car. And, you know, he's been filming for these years on an iPhone 4, right? It didn't start out high quality. And so people that have formed around that, the audience does not expect insane high quality. It doesn't mean that you can cheap out and, you know, not give great content. In fact, the content now has to be actually better, because you don't have some of that production quality to camouflage for, you know, some of the flavor that might be missing. You know, it's just kind of like steak or sushi, really good stuff. You have it without too much on in there, right? But then if you go to a place that the steak or sushi needs to be, dressed up with a lot of seasoning to hide the fact that it's not very high quality. So you can think of this similarly. The production quality might be considered a little less crappy than others, but it is on brand. So instead of these drastic measures, try upgrading in iterations. The camera, the mic, the desk, the editing, the backdrop, all this stuff took me years to accumulate and evolve. At the end of the day, you want to make your set feel like you. The third lever is pre-production. This is the lever that most shows can rely pulling on no matter how big they get. The more time you invest into pre-production, you save 10x or 100x that time in post-production. We all just want to show up, riff, and talk about what comes up in the moment, but that typically doesn't yield the best clips, quotes, or stories. A lot of the biggest shows engineer those viral clips into their process ahead of time. The guest already has a heads up that they might be talking about this story or that problem. Just like how traditional YouTube videos rely on scripting to be the biggest part of pre-production, it's very similar with podcasts, except your focus is on the titles, questions, and topics rather than word-for-word styled scripting. This can be boring, but once you feel the effects of it working, you'll see what I mean. All it takes is for you to see and feel one episode take off because of all of the time that you've invested into pre-production. I remember one of the first times I took this seriously for YouTube, I was able to get somebody who has a Netflix show to be the 11th view, comment on that video, and share it with his network. I harp so hard on this lever because our genre is so similar to stand-up comedy. The words matter more because there's no other props on stage. You can't just rely on Mr. Beast-styled editing for your podcasts to hold attention. The words on their own need to carry someone through the episode. And you can increase your chances of nailing this by strategizing in pre-production. Start by brainstorming 3 to 5 potential titles before you even think about recording. Pick the one that's most intriguing or directly relates to your listener's pain point. Remember, your titles drive clicks and your clicks drive listeners. So treat it as your most important pre-production step. Lever number 4, personas. All the best podcasts have figured out one thing really well: the exact persona they are speaking to. And a lot of times these personas are born out of existing market segments. So in the fitness industry, let's consider the endurance market. Within that, we can think of runners or swimmers or triathletes, for example. There's always something that 50-60% of them are adopting something new, and the rest of them don't want to. So let's say that the new thing is that keto is the best diet for runners. You'll have podcasts around that persona that speak to that kind of thing. But there's usually an opportunity for the persona that's actually being ignored. All the other runners who don't want to do keto will be looking for someone who actually gets it. Start with your past self from a few years ago as your first persona. Ask, what were my biggest struggles, frustrations, pain points, hopes when I was in that position? Use those insights and that exact language to guide your messaging. As your audience grows, pay attention to the common themes in their comments and feedback. This will reveal an additional 1 to 2 personas that you can use to refine your focus. This helps podcast growth because every decision you make can be filtered through the POV of that persona. Once you can really describe the kind of person that your podcast is perfect for, you can now begin to find them everywhere. A lot of podcasts wait too long to do this exercise, losing out on years and years of growth before they finally take it seriously. Understanding this better pays huge dividends when you're picking titles, choosing guests, and every other high leverage area of your show. The 5th lever is distribution strategy. The low leverage version of this would be if you did an audio only podcast and you did no other promo at all. It works for some brands depending on how they're using their podcast. But for most of us, we want the maximum amount of clips, tweets, and every type of media that we can extract from this core piece of effort that we just poured hours into. You'll find at the top levels of podcasting, this is the one lever that they are most creatively maximizing. You might see 3 YouTube shorts a day, 6 tweets in one day, and then another 2 Instagram posts, and then 16 stories, and whatever other media that you're seeing published everywhere. And it feels like, wow, how could they actually handle this volume? Well, this output requires a team of 2 to 8 on average, or at least it used to. I think the advance in technology has allowed the everyday podcaster to take control of their distribution as one person if they really wanted to. There's a connectedness that people will feel when engaging with your brand on different platforms. It will be similar stuff, but it will feel new and fresh because it's packaged up just a little bit differently. Remember that levers look like luck. Without understanding the variables that go into podcast growth, it can feel hopeless. So take comfort in the fact that your favorite podcasts are pulling on these very same levers. They might just have more resources available to deploy right now. Whenever these strategies fail for most people, it's almost always because they prioritized the wrong lever. The production quality got all the time and resources when pre-production might have been the lever that people really needed. This is why growing a podcast isn't a copy and paste strategy. It requires looking inward and being honest about what we could work on. None of these levers matter though if you're working on an idea that you wouldn't be willing to work on for at least 3 years. I say that because you'll turn these levers into tactics if it's an idea that you don't really care about long term. This often is the hidden lever that allowed shows to become bigger. They were able to stay in the game for years, even when they got 15 downloads an episode. So a quick recap: focus on guests who elevate your show's topics and positioning. Upgrade your setup in small, authentic ways that feel like you. Invest time in pre-production to nail titles, questions, and topics. Speak directly to one specific persona to create deep connections, and commit to an idea you'll stick with for 3+ years for long-term growth. So which lever are you pulling on first? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to start applying these today, book a free strategy call with me at podmahal.com or in the description below. Don't just think about it. Start pulling on these levers now and set your podcast up for success.